Yeah, you got a lot
Y'all
of
will be
people.
in there for 2 hours, and we're gonna be done in about 20
You got
minutes.
a lot of people in there.
You're gonna be, the mics will be on soon, and, for the streaming, you might wanna just let them know that both committees are public and the other ones in the other.
All right, we're gonna get started with the policy committee work here, and we've got a quorum. And also for those that are listening, the policy committee's meeting in the boardroom, and in the board lounge is where the performance committee is meeting. Their meeting's gonna be recorded and it'll be posted later, so you can listen to this one on the live stream, and you should be able to find out what the performance committee talked about at a later date if you're not there. If you are want to run over here real quick, then you can get into the room and you can hear it live as well. So we are going to continue on in our work with the charter agreement. And one of the things I just wanted to note, and I guess maybe talk with Ashley about this. How do you want to handle when we receive public comment? Like, I got a public comment into my email, so maybe I should just forward that to you and then let you, if we get more public comments, because I'm going to encourage everybody to, it'd be great if you're not, unless we got one person in the audience. Were you planning on making a public comment? No, so no public comment from him. So what we could do is then just tell people that if, maybe even put it in the newsletter to say if you would like to make public comment on possible changes to the charter agreement, please email it to the Office of Charter Schools, and then we could just compile it into kind of one document for us to all look at then. And so we could set that out for 2 weeks from today, that if they don't have it, we need it by 2 weeks from today. But here's one that I received. This was from Kelly Painter at Bradford Prep. It said they had an issue with how their insurance certificate read last year, and that there was changes, and so they said we might want to look again to make sure that the charter agreement matches up with exactly with what the policy says we have to have on that. So let's make sure we do that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I know that was an issue. It wasn't so much that, like, the schools didn't have the coverage. It wasn't worded correctly. It was getting the insurance company to word it correctly on their certificate of insurance that they provided.
Okay, so, and then they provided, I think it's from the charter school manual, or maybe from the, it says A15 Civil and Liability Insurance Certificate. The nonprofit board must hold current active civil and liability insurance with a minimum coverage defined. So if we're saying you got to have this, we need to just make sure that it's in the current charter. And it may just be that the charter had been amended and they were going off something old or something like that.
She's referring, the A15 is referring to performance framework.
Okay, so that's
the
performance framework.
requirement, so that's probably what she's referring to.
And again, the issue was, I think, more the wording. Like, it didn't specifically say maybe crime coverage on the certificate of insurance. It said bonded insurance. And so that was kind of a hang up with performance framework.
Okay. So let's go a little more into, can find this. This is my, luck. I'm trying to find the document that I did all this work in. There it is. I found it. So, one of the things that we had mentioned is, in section 3.1, we talked about the incorporation of the application into the charter. And talked about how maybe we need to be a little more specific with that. Because when you think about something like, you make a minor budgetary change, is that an amendment? And so we talked about, maybe putting something in there, the application as amended. The application is amended, or, I don't know, this is what makes it difficult, because there's some things where, like, really probably shouldn't become a part of the agreement, where then you can't change it. But then just like the state board can change this license, the schools can change some things. But then certain things require,
You guys got the smaller committee today.
you really do.
So you wanna put some flexibility so that it matches in
Well, I mean-
reality what the flexibility is.
Right, because we say, all the representations and conditions contained in the application are binding on the charter school. And then but then we allow them some flexibility inside that, so that if they, move a budgetary line, or if they decide to, well, we've decided to hire one less teacher and just increase the class size by 3 students per class, and this, we're not like, now you're not in violation, but you would technically be in violation of your charter, because that was not what was in your application.
Can we add something like in substance? Or like, so that way, that's might be more. Yeah, cause to me, that's something that's minor that gets changed.
Right.
Saying, and it's not really changing the meaning of the charter when they change a line item budget.
This comes up again somewhere else too, I think, when we talk about what substance is,
Mhm.
because
It's in the very next section when it says, in any proposed substantial changes.
what is that?
Yeah. I almost feel like maybe what we need to do is go through the application. We won't do that with us sitting here, but go through the application and say, yeah, this one is something that, it has to be, has to stay the same. So we could do it that way, or another thing, the other thing we could do is just, I don't know, do we even have a list of things that charter schools can change, that they don't need OCS approval, they don't need, because when they make a change to their budget, like if they give a raise to their executive director or their principal, they don't have to come to OCS or anything, but that's not what their budget was in their charter, which is now a part of the agreement.
Can we put something maybe to the effect that any changes that are not direct, that is not specifically outlined, that has to go to the Office of Charter Schools or to the state board? Because we do have lists of what has to go to the state board, we have a list of what has to go to
That's
Office
probably the best way
Office
to
of
do it.
Charter. Because then we can add to that list as we go, okay, well now you have to go to the Office of Charter Schools to
Right.
change your budget, if we decide to do that.
Or,
Be already detailed.
or if the state board says, well, we're gonna push that back down to OCS, we don't have to change this again.
It's-
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'm writing up something and seeing if, and it's along those lines, just to see how it goes. Having a little trouble with the, how to do it for sure, but something like that, like this, just add another sentence in there, portions of the application that may be amended by the nonprofit without the approval of the State Board of Education or Office of Charter Schools pursuant to policy, and then state that policy there, and which are amended by the nonprofit, are incorporated as amendments to this charter, or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. A little awkward, but how you can clear it up.
Well, I'm sure, yeah, legal, or when I'm sitting later looking at it, I'll,
Okay.
something where it sounds clear,
That's the
will
gist
make
of it,
sense.
yeah.
And then we wanted to just reference the policy in 3.2, so we can do that. That won't be hard. And actually, we want to change it to, is it material revisions? Right, any proposed substantial changes? I think we want to change to material
Mhm.
revisions, because that's what the policy says. Or that's what the statute says. And then I guess we really don't need to discuss it too much. If you go down to 4.3, we'll, I'll pull that statute.
Just have it mirror.
And just make the modifications to make it match the statute.
Has the framework been updated so that they have to match the statute anyway on that?
On the conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And
yes.
the nepotism?
Yes, that, the framework has, it's the language in the charter agreement that has that one clause that nobody's really sure where that clause came from, the substantial fee one.
It was pre-statute change.
Okay.
The state board did that, and then the statute was passed in response to what the state board had done.
Do you think we should add anything to the effect that it mirrors the state statute, and then if the state statute changes, that this would in effect change it as well?
I mean, I think, yeah, I'll have to look at the statutory language to make sure to say, you know, whether it is like permissive, this is what the state board can do within these boundaries, or if it's, this is what the policy shall be. And if it's what the shall be is, then we can make this really easy and just say the nonprofit board of directors shall adopt and ensure compliance with the conflict of interest and nepotism policy that meets the requirements of that, and then you know that at least meets the requirement of, and then the statute,
Okay.
you know. And then you can even say in any future amendments to the statute.
Great.
And then it'll shorten it way down.
Yes.
Okay, so then in 4.4, we wanted to talk more about the employment issue, about how the nonprofit will have ultimate responsibility for employment. And, we had the issue where it's came up now with dual employment, but I guess still the nonprofit is final say, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I guess. How does that work when you have this dual employment with, you know, the person's employed by the school and the E EMO?
Sometimes we see in their agreements different arrangements where it's like there's a committee, what they do process, or there's a 50-50, or they do like the benefits and the school does the salary. So yeah, what is the?
And everyone is different.
Yeah, they're all different.
So almost if we just leave that up to the nonprofit, they have the ultimate responsibility, but they can
Designate.
delegate some of that, you know, to an approved EMO or CMO. So I'll make a note on that, and then I'll come up with some language for that.
Yeah, maybe it was just to say, or designee.
The nonprofit or designee. And or, they do it together.
I think you can just put in there that nonprofit shall have ultimate responsibility for employment management, dismissal, discipline of its employees. The nonprofit may delegate to an approved EMO or CMO that has been approved under 4.4A. And then I think we need a sentence, and we talked about it, just something blanket like nothing in the terms of this charter shall imply or require that a charter school be anything other than an at-will employer. So I'll come up with some language for that too. Because that's when because then when you start looking at some things, then you're like,
It's a little.
it gets a little fuzzy from time to time. And then we talked about, and probably somebody that's more in it than I am, we're in section A or subsection A where it says the nonprofit shall not enter into or terminate an agreement for comprehensive management services. We probably need to define what comprehensive management services are, because we've had some that come up and they're like, well, we're providing instructional support and we're providing back office and we're providing payroll, but we're not a management company, right? We're just a consultant or whatever. And so I think there needs to be some definition of what is a EMO or a CMO. Because a consultant you can change, and you don't need state board approval to change consultants, but you need state board approval to change EMOs. So I think we need I think really we should modify that some and say, we need to define what an EMO and a CMO are, which is probably defined in statute, so we can probably just pull the statutory definition.
I think you guys did that in policy too.
We probably did.
Yeah, well, there's in, Charter 021, there's a definition for CMO and EMO. I mean, it's not super detailed, but there is one.
Okay. We'll do that then. I mean, I'm just kind of making notes of this, and then what I'm hoping to do is put it kind of into one document and then send it to everybody and post it on eBoard and then have like a conference call meeting so that then we can take action on it next meeting. Kind of raised some red flags in 5.1, and that's why I think we wanted to put that about the at-will employment, where it talks about the nonprofit shall comply with all regulations governing employment. It says federal laws and regulations governing employment. And it's one of those weird things where it's like, part of this agreement is you'll comply with the law. Well, That's kinda like, you have to do that anyway, you know? And so you're agreeing to do it. And I don't know all the federal laws and regulations regulating employment. You know, that would be, and I guess I would, you know, I worry about if it was state, you know, state laws doing it, like when you have, you know, teachers and the 3 years and the contracts and then the career status and those types of things.
Well, I would think this would be referencing more like Department of Labor laws, you know,
Yeah.
FLSA, those different things that, being a charter, they might not necessarily realize they apply to them because they're not definition of state employee.
So maybe we just need to clarify that. And then 5.2, we're just gonna insert the reference to the statute that requires compliance with the health and safety laws and regulations. In 7.1, we were gonna talk about, or we marked to put something in there about the weighted lottery.
And then one of the things that I had mentioned too was just, and again, I don't know if we'd wanna put in no I know this is really the statute when you read the non-discrimination, but I know it's come up before as far as enrollment, based on income level, proficiency in English language, and even athletic. I don't know if we wanted to try to clarify that more. So
I
that
mean,
there's a-
maybe that's where we should put the weighted lottery thing and say that, you know, all lotteries shall be conducted as completely, what do you call it, random, I guess it would be. I mean, it's a random lottery, and no preference shall be given except by an approved weighted lottery. Because you could do, I mean, you could do a weighted lottery for other things, like intellectual ability. I mean, you could do the weighted lottery and say we want, you know,
Certain IQ score or something.
yeah, high IQ, or you could say we want, you know, our thing is we feel like students that are, you know, between a 70 and a 90 would be our, you know, that we really think our plan, that could be a target. And so I think you can do that, but I think you just have to be approved to do it. The things that you can't do a weighted lottery for are these things that are listed in there. And I think, and I guess you're talking about the recruitment as much as the lottery as well.
Cause there isn't anywhere in this agreement that we talk about you can't give preference to those other types of things.
Yeah.
It does come up.
I mean, we do have people that do, I mean, they specifically recruit students from low income areas, and so I don't want them to not be able to do that. In the recruitment. So maybe we should put that in the lottery
Okay.
section. So I guess the way that the lottery is now. Mm.
But the lottery and the weighted lottery are kind of two different things.
Right.
And you're talking about preference in both, really.
Right. So when you do the lottery, you don't wanna have those biases or preferences, whether it's a regular lottery or if you
Right.
introduce a weighted lottery, it can only be for certain specific things, and that has to be clearly defined, what you're weighting.
Yeah.
Because again, when this was written, we didn't even have a weighted lottery option.
Those are probably the most prevalent violations that you hear in the rumor mill,
Mm-hmm.
are the ones she's talking
And
about.
most students always go with the athletic thing.
Mostly, yes.
Mhm.
Sometimes cherry picking also
Right.
with proficiency.
And income.
So,
I mean, it's just, it's one of those things where, I don't know how you enforce it and say, well, you can't recruit high-performing students to apply. I think it's one thing to give them preferential
Mission.
admission. It's another thing to recruit, that you say, okay, this is the, I mean, we've got one of these situations where it's like you can't recruit with regards to race or color or sex, but then you're told in statute that you're supposed to make every effort to make the demographic breakdown of your charter school match the LEA. So, which means you have to recruit
That demographic.
that demographic to try to match, if you came in and you were, if your LEA was, 30% black and, 40% white and 30%, Hispanic, and then, if you had, you would recruit, you're trying to make it match to
Part
go
of this
with what that
population.
statute is, and so, I mean, it's one of those things, I mean, I think it's, I don't know if recruitment should be in there, I guess is what I'm getting at. If maybe it should just be
Enrollment.
student enrollment
Yeah.
decisions.
I think that's
I would
actually- I
agree.
think that would probably.
And then that probably,
Yeah, I like that idea. Just take the word recruitment out and that kind of eliminates a lot of that.
it's okay, we've rewrote the whole charter agreement, Mr. Snyder.
No worries.
I was gonna charge you hourly to look at it. Is this one done?
No, we're still going. We need you in here.
Oh, seriously?
We're talking about amending a legal document, so
Sorry, we had a EC matter running.
it's
around.
okay. I think the rest of that section is okay.
So we're gonna remove student recruitment.
Right.
Recommend removal.
Yeah, so it'll just say student enrollment decisions shall be made in a non-discriminatory manner.
And then are we gonna add anything in there about the weighted lottery, just that that's
I
an
think we
option?
can, put that up at 7.1.
Okay.
Just something along the lines of, the charter school may not use a weighted lottery unless it has been approved by the state board pursuant to the statute and
statute, yeah.
policy. Yeah.
No, I think that's good.
Mhm.
I think we were down in section 9 now.
Yep.
In 9.1. So somebody brought up about the not sending children back. Who was it that brought
Yes,
that up?
I brought that, I had some wording that I come up with. The school's obligated to provide free and appropriate education and related services to students with disabilities. The school may not send students back to the local LEA because the school lacks the services, nor may the school counsel students out of the school.
Okay.
And we can change it up, but it was just, I know that, again, that's been an issue.
And that is consistent with federal law, right?
I would think so. I don't know how they
I mean,
work it, but I
I'm-
would think so.
Are you an expert on that, Mr. Snyder?
I would be subject to check.
Yeah, I think we'll, if you don't mind sending me that language, and then I'll put it in that document that I'm working on.
All right, I'll email it.
And we did the same thing somebody brought up about, that we probably need to put something in here, cause I think maybe some charters don't know about the
McKinney-Vento.
homeless, yeah. What's the name of that?
McKinney-Vento,
McKinney-Vento.
and that's
it.
federal law,
And it's
but
required.
Mhm.
about homeless.
If you receive federal funds, which most of our schools receive 060.
Okay, then in section 10, we talked about how we wanted to kind of beef up something there to talk about the audit. Which which makes me want to put something like, if an audit is more than 4 months past due, you are subject to immediate termination. I mean, it's
That's at the end
impossible
of
for us to do proper financial compliance if the audit's not in on time.
Right.
It's just impossible to do it. And I think the LGC gives them a grace period until like December 31st. So maybe we could just say January 31st.
Do we wanna say termination, or do we wanna say that they'll be, what if it's something that's becomes part of when we renew them, if they come up for renewal, it's automatically, we know that that's non-compliance in finance.
Right. Let's see here.
The other thing I think we need to, I'm not sure if this would be the place to address it, would also just be financial solvency. Because sometimes that's the issue, not getting a audit report on time, is a financial solvency issue.
Right.
So do we wanna do January 31, or do we wanna do the LGC's
I
deadline?
think January
So
31.
give them 30 days past the LGC.
I mean, maybe this is too mean here, but in the event the nonprofit fails to submit its annual audit to the local government commission by January 31st of each year, the State Board of Education may immediately terminate the charter.
That's good, because you do say may,
Yeah.
because there could be a very valid.
I mean, you know what the state board's gonna be like, come in front of CSAB, explain why you don't have the audit, and then they'll look at it, but I mean, I think if we put, it's just, it's too many, and it's repeat offenders, and not all the time, but most of the time, when the audit's not coming in until February or March, it's because there's a mess going on. So, I don't know, I mean, I think that's, so, that gives you 3 months past when it was actually due. 'Cause you've got all of November, all of December, and all of January, and it was due October 31st. So, and maybe that's just a pet peeve of mine, but I just think it's impossible. I mean, it's, especially with the renewal schools. We come in here and we're getting ready to vote on whether they're gonna renew or not, and we get to hear finance say, well, we don't have an audit yet. You know, you would think the 1 year you could get the audit in would be your renewal year. You know, whether you're gonna continue to operate anymore, maybe that would be the year to really get it done on time. So, okay, I'm off my soapbox. All right, so moving in then to section 11. We said we needed to probably clarify 11.2, because the way it reads is that the nonprofit basically has to notify the SBE if they close because it snowed, which then under the provisions, they would have to do that in writing to the address that's down below. You know, just wanted to let you know we had a snow day, you know, or whatever. I think maybe we could clarify it that requires the closure. I mean, and that's the question, is what does closure mean, right? Does it mean permanent closure? Closure of, you know, should it be a closure of more than 4 days or 5 days? Or what does that mean? How do you read that? I don't know if you've got this pulled up, Eric.
Section 12.
It's 11.2, where it says, the nonprofit shall notify the SBE immediately of any circumstances requiring the closure of the public charter school including but not limited to a natural disaster such as an earthquake, storm, flood, or other weather-related event, other extraordinary emergency or destruction of or damage to the school facility. And so the question we kind of had is, does closure there, does that mean one day? Does that mean permanent closure? Does that mean a lengthy closure? Because I think nobody's requiring schools, you know, every time it snows or every time, you know, there's a storm that required them to close school early, that they were doing this. I mean, how do you read that?
It's a good question, Stephen. I think it's worth the committee flagging that as an issue to make sure that the best intent is articulated. I don't know how it's played out in practice. I mean, certainly the kinds of things that are identified here, natural disaster, earthquake, storm, flood, certainly we've seen plenty
Like
of
a
floods
longer,
that's
like a
what it
longer
seems to
period.
suggest, but it seems like some clarity there might be, some additional clarity may be useful. In particular, if there's a concern about an undue burden on schools needing to report, you know, closed because of clouds or something like this, right? The one day
Right.
snow day. You know, that said, there may be some questions with respect to keeping track of how weather-related events are treated perhaps differently in charters versus some traditional schools. So for example, there may be some utility in that data coming in. I'm just not sure how it's been treated, right? So if your whole district closed down, but the charter would like them to stay open, that may be of some value, and was intended to be reported as part of this. I'm just not sure how it's played out in practice.
All right, I'll put this and then we can look and see how we might change it.
Maybe the word extended closure.
Yeah, I was even thinking about putting like a long-term closure or something like that, and then defining that in the, you know, as another sentence to it. A long-term closure is when the school is closed for more than 5 days and the closure was not planned in the public charter school's calendar. Something like that. I mean, because I think
Or that would maybe necessitate the need to make up school days. I mean, maybe something along those lines.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes you'll have normal closures that you're not necessarily having to make up those days.
Maybe 10 days would be more reasonable. We have those winters sometimes at 5, and someone might build those into their calendar, then it's a moot point.
well, we did 5 consecutive days.
And
You still
after all,
think
we can
10?
get an inch of ice and closer to 5
Yeah.
days.
So how about more than 10 consecutive days?
I think so.
Yes,
If that would be what's considered long-term.
because I think that would be more
And I actually think I like
emergency
the
or something.
Right.
extended. I think that's probably what Laura Crumpler was trying to get at when she put this in here. I don't think she was wanting
All the snow days.
every charter school to call the Office of Charter Schools and be like, we're out for snow today. Okay. Yeah. We might just have to call Laura Crumpler back in here and say, what did you mean when you wrote that in 1998 when she wrote the first charter agreement? Because I think a lot of this language is still there from then. We talked too about how all these start when it's notifications. The nonprofit shall notify the SBE immediately, or the nonprofit shall immediately notify the SBE. And we thought about putting in all those, you know, through notification to the Office of Charter Schools. Everybody still think that's good?
Mhm.
Because I think that's, would probably be the way the state board would prefer to receive these notifications. You know, or we could just have them notify them through, Chair Davis's cell phone. I don't think he would like that. I think that would just be the easier way to do it. You have to remember when this charter was initially drafted, there was no such thing as the Office of Charter Schools.
Mhm.
So.
And in practice, actually, we do 11.5 Do charter schools notify you if they're more than 60 days past due in debts?
No, not to my knowledge.
Because I think this has come up in the past. When we talk to a charter school and they come up forward, we realize that they have outstanding debt issues with vendors. Necessarily
It's
aware.
been a lot longer than 60 days, yeah. And I guess really we don't have anything we need to change with that. I think it's just schools need
Kind
to
of
be,
enforcing and being aware of.
remember, maybe we could do something in the, or any of the performance framework, is it all just documents or some of it questions that they answer?
It's all documents or data that's pulled from accountability.
So maybe what you could put there in the performance framework is something like, provide a list of any obligation that is past due by 60 days or more as of this date. And put that in the performance framework, and then that would, of course, if the performance framework's due in, when was it due, February? It was due in February, and then they go 60 days past due, and they're in April, 60 days past due, we don't find out till February still. But there has to be some way, I think
At least
most
it's-
charter schools probably don't know that they have to do this.
Well, I think if you saw that every year in the performance framework, it would
It would start.
start you thinking, okay,
Yeah, you could even put in there, you know, this, and then as a reminder, you're required to supplement this throughout the year or whatever.
the question could be in the performance framework, anytime during the past year, have you been more than 60 days past due?
Actually, that's a good idea, good thing, yeah. And then list what they are, and
And they could be cured already, but
at least we would know.
self-reporting. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah.
We'll be happy to talk with Joseph about that.
We require policies from the board, it's kind of rhetorical, but related to some of these things in this, or updates to their policies. So for example, if something's 60 days late, that they keep a record of it, prepare a performance framework kind of thing for the board's policies.
I don't know, I mean, might be.
Sure,
an
we don't
action.
require that, right? For the board,
I'm sorry, I
for the board to have a policy that kind of aligns with things that are directly in this agreement, but specifically talking about the 60 days or more for vendors. You know.
No, we don't have a specifically says.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything in policy now.
I do think the performance framework piece will probably at least raise that awareness enough that they'll be looking at that as they plan ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, that will let us start to see
Patterns.
things are unraveling
Sooner.
sooner, you know. Do vendors ever call the Office of Charter Schools and be like, such charter school won't pay me?
Not to my knowledge, only when there's been like assumption or E&O like
Changes.
that have not gone well.
Okay. All right, well, we'll put that on the burner for another policy committee meeting about whether we need to do something else with that. Not, I mean, because I think we all agree we don't need to change the agreement. We just need something.
To make sure
so
people are
Make sure that they know that they need to be doing that. Which you would think that it being in the charter agreement would be enough for them to know, but then it came as a surprise to all of us.
Right.
And we are dealing with this all the time. 11.6, our question was, if at any time student enrollment decreases compared to the most recent pupil count submitted to the SBE or DPI. And then we wondered, well, is that Power School? Is that the principal's monthly report? Is that 20-day ADM? What do you, 20% of what number? Because it just says the most recent pupil count. I mean, you're setting a most recent pupil count daily in Power School, right? I mean, if a student withdraws, that goes into Power School, right? So then you've got a new pupil count. And I can't imagine that what we really wanted to know is if your enrollment decreased by 20% in one day. Because that's what it would be if you look at that. So I think you might want to think the most recent pupil count, either say, I think it should be 20% from the 20-day ADM.
I think so
That
too,
makes
because
the most sense.
that affects your funding and, I mean, that's what you'll be funded on, but you're gonna have an issue the following year, so the sooner we can,
It's an indication too.
Yeah.
Something that's amiss.
but that's another one that I'm not sure if charter schools are reporting that immediately.
Well, if you take it, if you do the tricky lawyer reading of it, you'd be like, we did lose 20% since our last report was yesterday.
Right.
We only lost 5 students. That was 5%, not 20%. So we didn't have to tell you. And then the next day we lost 15 students, but that was only 15%. So we still haven't had to tell you, even though we lost 20% in the last 2 days. But we don't have to report that.
So I think the last sentence, or the end should be just changed to the first 20-day
Okay, so we'll do that. Everybody's good on 20-day. 12.2, we talked about certain things that had to be posted on the website.
And dating back how far?
Right.
That was one of the things I had brought up too about board transparency. I'd found some wording that talks about the board agrees to have on its website electronic copy of the school's approved charter, the signed charter agreement, board bylaws, articles of incorporation, the board's governance structure, all these other things too. Policy man, kind of list out the different things that they should have on there, and to me, it's just more about transparency.
Yeah, you've got those? If you can email that to me too, that'd be great. Yeah, I think that's,
I think that, maybe, and I wasn't sure where to put this, but maybe that's 12.2 would be the place to.
that would probably be the best. And then 12.3, we talked about, and maybe somebody from the Office of Charter Schools that, who's kind of doing the school closures now, Ashley? You are. So maybe you can, if you've got some ideas on what we can make them agree to, not that they're gonna do it. I mean, I think that's been a lot of the problems is you terminate a charter or you don't renew a charter. You're like, okay, now we need to work with you on the records. And they're like, you work on the records yourself. I don't have a charter anymore. I'm leaving, And I think that's where some of the problem comes, because you don't have anything to hold over them, So I've always thought that it should be like a A1 misdemeanor to not turn over the records as required by the statute, because they're supposed to return all those records over, because you're talking about messing with the kids, And we've had that happen. I mean, I remember, this is before both of y'all were on the board, we had a school that we terminated, and they went down, they said, okay, we need your records for the students. It was a high school. We need the records so we can do the transcripts and stuff like that for these kids that were trying to go to college and stuff. And they, in the basement of their building, stuck in a closet, they said, have at it. There's the student records.
Oh my gosh.
And they were just, and not even filed. It was just like stacks of stuff. And I mean, it was a mess. So there has to be some kind of, I mean, I know we can't put that it'll be a misdemeanor in here, but, but we can at least look at something. So maybe actually if you, I guess you have like a closure process, if we, just something else that we can hit them over the head with to make sure that they do this right. Because I can't imagine the frustration if I was a student or a parent of a student and I'm trying to get a transcript to get my kid into college, and the school that they went to 2 years ago in 9th grade, we can't get their data, because the records were never turned over. So Is it still an issue sometimes with schools? Are they doing better?
They're doing a lot better now that there's a more structured, like, framework, and we go and meet with them, and we meet with the board, and I think that's helped.
Well, we really haven't had a whole lot of really controversial closings lately either, which that helps. This one, the executive director was carried out of the room by her board members yelling at us, so that's interesting. All right, the insurance, okay, anybody understand that better than I do?
What would make this better is if we had this match what we specifically asked for in the performance framework on the certificate of insurance. Because I think that's where, because I know when I've looked at this, I'm like, well, okay, well, the insurance matches all this, but the wording's not technically the same as what's
Okay.
required on the performance framework.
Okay. Okay, and then in 14.2, we had mentioned that, about also, we've got granting access to local health for inspection of premises. And so we had talked about, should it be a violation of the charter if you don't get the cafeteria health inspection or the fire inspection done on time?
Because I think that was something I noticed that's not in here. Because just because you have a certificate that open, certificate of occupancy, doesn't mean you're complying with all the other regulations.
Okay, so just something along the lines of, failure to procure or failure to pass inspections required by law may be grounds for termination of the charter, something like that.
But I think we should put specifically health inspections, fire.
Yeah, including but not limited to health inspections and fire inspections for when you have the cafeteria. What's
I
that?
was gonna say, I thought the fire safety was a part of your occupancy, and like they did that whole walkthrough, that you all have to come together for that, not the cafeteria piece, I don't think. I do think so. 'Cause I always look at life safety, like you can't get that final until all your life safety meets code.
Yes, but however,
You don't either.
once you get your certificate of occupancy, you are subject to annual inspections of fire and health inspections. So.
If you have the cafeteria.
And there, right, so there could be, well, actually, we have health inspections and we don't have a cafeteria.
Yeah, that's true too. So after the fact, so I guess how do we, so it won't be necessarily tied to your certificate of occupancy, it could be, are we maintaining?
Yes, maintain, that's good.
I guess that's it, maintaining our proper.
Inspection certificates related to health, safety.
Or passing inspections, I mean, we wanna make sure that they.
Well, your health, I mean, actually,
You have to pass, right?
well, you could have a really bad score,
Yeah.
so do we need to say this, a certain score? I mean, I don't know if we wanna get into that.
What about an acceptable?
I mean, I don't think we have to say, well, you've got to have a A or whatever it is, because the health inspector is just going to be like, you're not serving lunch today if it's that bad, if they're going to be, whatever it is. Some of the best pizza I ever ate was from a place with a C one time. I mean, that was great. But,
So maybe we just wanna maintain the proper certifications annually.
Okay, I'll come up with some language for that and stick that in there. 15.2, we talked about matching it up with policy. And that was with the location change. So, cause we've got that policy that if it's, is it within 5 miles, they don't, you can approve it. Outside of 5 miles or changing the LEA requires state board approval. Okay. Yeah, so we just need to just kind of modify it. I don't know, it'll either be in 15.2 or 15.3, because 15.3 talks about it being a material revision. And so, but we were saying that within 5 miles wasn't a material revision, so we'll fix that. All right. 16.3, we were gonna change it from saying prior to each academic year to prior to the end of each calendar year. Just to match it up with what practice has been. Okay. And the next thing, we talked about in section 18, doing something with, about making that language match up with what is in the statute, and then also the blurb that's in the application.
So it's
You
not a
know,
barrier.
that it's not, transportation's not a barrier. Yeah, so that will just copy and paste to make sure the wording matches up. Then in 19.1, I think that is a vestige of when the university system could do preliminary approvals of charters. I think we should strike the University of North Carolina from that. Any objection to that, counselor? Okay. And actually, I think we should add the Charter School Advisory Board in there, to be honest with you. I think it should say DPI. I think even, I'm of the contract, even though I know this isn't a contract, it's a license. I always had to, Laura Crumpler, every time I'd say contract, she'd say, it's a license, not a contract. I'm of the opinion, same way as draft statutes, you beat it over the head to make sure that you get it right. So maybe it should say DPI, OCS, and Charter School Advisory Board. Just to make sure that they understand, because there's been times that OCS was under the direction of SBE, but now they're under the direction of DPI. So I think just to make it clear. Okay, so we'll do that. All right, section 20. 20.3, we talked about possibly changing that just to
So it says something about suspends.
yeah, well, yeah, that was in 20.4. That was it. Yeah, I think the first one, we talked about just, something like at the end that nothing in this, nothing in this charter prohibits them from developing their own student code of conduct, you know. And then it was in 20.4, we thought we should delete the word suspends or. And it should just be in the event the school expels a student. So expels only. Because we couldn't think of any reason why a charter school would need to tell the LEA that they had suspended a student. But why they would need to if they expelled the student, because then the student's gonna be going back to the LEA. I mean, I think if you suspended a student for a day, I don't think you should be able to have to tell the LEA, hey, I suspended this student for a day.
I believe that's in Power School anyway, all the discipline,
It probably is.
Power School, so when they get the records, that would be in there.
So then we'll have to delete the length of the suspension expulsion and make it just say special education status and the circumstances giving rise to the expulsion. Okay.
One thing I'm thinking about this is situations where maybe a student's been expunged. Are we required?
They get expelled and then they,
Expunged, well, that process is long and lengthy, right? Would you be?
so you could get an expulsion expunged. I guess you would have to go back and tell them, hey, it got expunged. I guess that's the only way you could do it. Yeah.
In real time.
Yeah, because you don't know when that's going to happen. I mean, it could be months, a year down the road. The next was in 22, criminal background checks. I think we want to just put something in there about the policy that we worked on. And that the background checks they do,
I think currently the statute said it has to match the policy of the local.
right, yeah. And I think and I'm talking about in regards to board members. I think that's more for employees. So I think we'd probably, because for employees, it has to match that. I don't know if you were required to do background checks on board members.
Thought you were.
I think we do.
Yeah,
Because I know we
And
do
we
for
follow
the
the same
application.
policy. We do the same policy that's for employees, the same policy we use for.
Okay,
But maybe we need to clarify that in here because.
probably so, if there's that, just kind of.
okay.
And have their fingerprints on file also, in
Right.
addition to the background check.
If that's what
Oh, if that's what you're.
if that's what the LEA requires, yeah, that's where it's been. I mean, I know that requires a statutory change, but I think that's just not a good way to do it. We should just have a floor, and then you can do anything above the floor. I don't know why we have to have 115 different iterations of how a charter school can do their background checks. Anyway. But that's for the building with 4 pyramids on it across the mall. Then we didn't have anything until we got down to 25. And we wanted to just change the words. We just needed to change it up a little bit because the word adequate is from old law, where you were either adequate or inadequate as a charter school, and now we have low performing, continually low performing, and so I think the language just needs to match up a little bit.
Is there a way to articulate it so if it changes again, we wouldn't have to go back and change this? So putting that specific low performing, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Say performance in alignment with current statute or something like that.
I'm gonna put a little note here to use timeless language. And I'll come up with something that'll do it. If I can't, somebody can. Next thing we had flagged to look at was 30. We talked about notice. And just that needed to change that, and also allow it by email as well. Put the email address in there. Number 30.
Yeah.
Because y'all's address is not 6303 Mail Service Center anymore, is it?
No, that needs to be updated, and we don't use fax machine anymore.
So we'll take taxes out too.
All taxes, there's no way to guess.
Reminds me in the TV show The Office where he says, I'll fax that over to you. He's like, what century is this? And he goes, come on, quit joking. This is really important. He goes, oh, it's important? Then email it to me. And that's kind of the way that I feel sometimes. What do you mean? People call, what's your fax number? We do not have a fax number, okay? Just no more faxes. All right. So if you'll get me the address and the email address y'all want to use for that. That works. I think that was it that we had gone through. And I'm sure we'll get, I've had a couple people tell me, I'm gonna send you something that I've noticed, so if they do, then we'll mark it to discuss too. Anything
I
we're
kinda-
missing?
I glanced through the minutes, and I didn't see anything that was in the minutes from last.
Time that we didn't discuss now. Anything else, Ashley? Counselor, anything we need to know?
Not at this time.
So much fun drafting drafting contract by committee.
Is indeed.
This is good though. I mean, I don't think that there's been like a real long look through at this agreement in a long time, so I think this is helpful. All right then. Who wants to make a motion? We adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
All right, motion by Ben Kroger, seconded by Heather Von Cannon. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Policy Committee's adjourned, and we're done. We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your hard work looking at this and thinking about it. I have something for you.